Hi everyone, today I want to show you a plugin for Cinema 4D that will make putting holes into your geometry a lot easier. And this plugin is called Nitro Cycle. It is by Nitro4D. And before we get started, let's have a quick look at the website where you can buy that plugin. I will put a link to this website in the video description, and on the website you can see that this plugin currently costs 15 euros. For European customers at least, you will have to add value added tax to that, so it's about 20 euros. And you can see the available version is 1.2. It is available both for Windows and Mac, and if you are working with older releases of Cinema 4D, I'm still running release 18, this plugin will work in all four versions: Prime, Visualize, Broadcast and Studio. And you will need at least release 15 to be able to use the plugin. You can buy this plugin for release 20 and older, or you can buy it for release 21 and newer. And when you buy the plugin, you will need to enter your 11 digits, which will be the basis for the license key that Nitro4D will generate for you. If you scroll down that page, you can see what you get when you buy the plugin. You will get the plugin, of course, which will be sent to you by email as a zip file, and you will also get a video tutorial. Actually, for Nitro Cycle, it's 3 short tutorials, which are very useful. At the bottom of the page, you have further information. There's a short description and information on the version updates. The current version is 1.2. There's some additional information. For example, this plugin is available for single and multi-user licenses. And there also is a video on YouTube that introduces the plugin. But this video is not as good as the video tutorials you get when you actually buy the plugin. Now let's jump into Cinema 4D and see how the plugin works. So here we are back in Cinema 4D again, and I've prepared an example file with a couple of simple objects for the purpose of demonstration. If you want to, you can download that file and follow along. Now, once you've installed the plugin, it will be available in your plugins folder, and there's two things that you need to do when you install the plugin. First of all, you need to copy the plugin into your Cinema 4D plugins folder, and the license key file that you get, you will need to put that into your Cinema 4D main folder. So the plugin is down here. I'm just going to undock that, and you can see that we have two options. One is the Nitro Cycle generator, and one is the Nitro Cycle tool. We're going to have a look at this one first. And right now, this is grayed out because in order for it to work, you need editable geometry. And you can see I have this plane selected. I'll just drag out a copy. And as soon as I make this editable, you can see the plugin can now be used. And the way this works is that you need to make a polygon, edge or point selection. The tool will work in either component mode. So if I go to point mode and select a point, then use the Nitro Cycle tool, left click on that point, it will create the shape. I can go back, let's go to polygon mode, select a couple of polygons, use that tool, left click, and the shape will be created. And the same goes for edge mode. In edge mode, you need to be careful because you need to select an outline rather than, say, make a selection like this. If I use the Nitro Cycle tool and left click, you can see this will create a big mess. So make sure to select an outline when you use an edge selection. And as you can see, you can have multiple selections when you want to use that tool. When you use the Nitro Cycle tool and not the Nitro Cycle generator, there is one, it's not really a disadvantage, but you just need to be aware of that. you can create these shapes from multiple selections, but it is only possible to make adjustments to all of these selections and not just to one of the selections. I'll just undo that and go back to polygon mode. Let's start with a polygon selection here. So I left click on this polygon selection and the shape will be created. And there's a couple of things you can do to modify this shape. And there's shortcuts that allow you to interactively make adjustments in the viewport. For example, if I left click and drag, I can change the scale. If I hold down Control, I can rotate the shape. But of course, you also have the possibility to make those changes over here in the Attributes Manager. And you can see with the Nitro Cycle tool selected, we have 3 tabs here. All of the changes that you want to make, you can make on the main tab. On the Help tab, you will find the shortcuts that you can use to interactively make adjustments in the viewport. You can also hit this button here, which is the key map, and you can define your own shortcuts if you want to, or reset the ones that you save to go back to the default settings. And the third tab is just information about the plugin. Here you can see that I'm using version 1.2, which is the current version. So we're going to focus on the main tab because that's where we can make all of the changes. And you have a reset button here at the top, and the reset button will reset all of the parameters down here. So if I hit reset, it's going to change the scale and the rotation back to the default. And you can make these changes as long as the tool is still active. As soon as you switch to another tool like the Move tool or Extrude tool, you will lose the ability to make any more changes to that selection. So here I can scale, I can rotate the object, and these buttons here over on the right allow you to reset each of the parameters separately. So if I don't like the rotation, I can reset it to 0 while keeping the adjusted scale, for example. You can also make the selections more or less round. If this is set to 0, it means that the plugin will create a perfect circle. I'm not sure if adjusting this will make changes here. It does, but I'll show you this with a different polygon selection where it's going to be more obvious. In any case, an amount of 0% means basically that a circular shape will be completely circular. The interactions is more or less the subdivisions of the round corners that you get. So the further you bring them up, the maximum is 10, the rounder the object will be, and the more you bring them down, the less round the object will be. Again, this selection is a bad example for that. We're going to have a look at a different selection where this will become more obvious. As for the radius, I'm not really sure what that does. In this case, it doesn't seem to do anything, so I'm just going to ignore it. And we've already had a look at turn. With this option, you can rotate the selection if you want to. The surface option is mainly important if you have curved surfaces. There's not going to be any difference if I make changes. So if I switch that to off, well, it actually does make a change. But in this case, we have a flat surface. I think target really means that the surrounding geometry adjusts to adjustments that you make here to the scale, for example. If I switch that off, you will get a result like this. And I'm not really sure what the difference is between original and target. In this case, they both seem to do the same thing, really. I'll just go back a few steps. And this time I'm going to make a different selection, one like this, then use the tool. And you can see by default we're getting a perfect circle. Let's go ahead and scale this down a bit. In this case, we could also rotate this around a bit to line the geometry up a little bit better. Maybe let's do something like this. And now if I change the roundness, you can actually see the change. So you can do something like this, then rotate the selection to where it needs to be. Maybe let's do something like this. And now we should also be able to see changes if we adjust the interactions. You can see the further I bring this down, it returns to the square or rectangular shape, and if I bring these iterations up, it's going to make the round areas rounder. And you can't go further than 10 or lower than 0, which wouldn't make any sense anyway. So maybe let's do something like this. We can then scale this up. Let's see if the radius does anything here. No, it doesn't. So I'll keep ignoring that. And when you're finished, you could use extrude inner on this selection, for example, to create the control edges around this shape. And let's extrude this up a bit, extrude up a little bit more. And again, I'll just delete the polygons at the top. And if I use a subdivision surface object, you can see that we're getting a nice transition between the original shape and the one we extruded. So now let's go and have a look at what we can do on curved surfaces. And let's start with this loft object. I'll just drag out a copy. And sometimes it's useful to have even geometry if you want to create perfectly circular shapes, but it's not really necessary. And I'm using this mainly for subdivision surface modeling. And one thing to remember is that, or one thing to bear in mind is that you do need a certain amount of geometry to be able to support the shape that you're creating. But of course we can change this. And in this case I don't want that many subdivisions. And let's make these a little bit elongated, maybe something like this. And I'll make this editable. And let's go ahead and make a polygon selection. I'll just reverse the normals before I do. So maybe let's make a selection like this. And then use the tool. And it looks a bit messy, so let's go ahead and make some adjustments. First of all, I'm going to bring down the scale a little bit. Let's change the roundness to something like this, and then we can scale this up again a little bit to something like this maybe. Let's try and play with the iterations. Let's do something like this. Let's see if the radius does anything. Nope, it doesn't. And I don't really want to rotate this. It seems to be fine. But let's have a look at the surface options, because now we're working with a curved surface. And by default, this is set to target. And you can see the selection adjusts to the shape of that curved surface. If I change that to off, we're getting something that is flat. And in most cases, that is probably not what you want. So I would recommend to leave it on target. Let's see if original is any different. It doesn't look like it makes any difference. So original and target, for all I know, seem to be the same thing, more or less. I'm going to scale this up a little bit further. I just need to be careful because we're getting weird looking geometry if we scale this up too much. So let's go for something like this maybe. And then we can use extrude inner to create our control edge or control loop around this shape. And I'm going to quick extrude this forward a little bit. Do another extrusion, scale these polygons down to 0. And just delete them. And if we put this in a subdivision surface object, you can see we're getting something that is looking nice and clean. And that would be much harder to do if you try and model this by hand. Let's go ahead and add another shape, and let's say this time we want something that is circular. So I'm going to select a couple polygons. Let's use these 4. Maybe let's use these 4 up here. And I'm going to use that tool, left click on the selection. Now in this case we need to rotate this a little bit around. Do something like this. Maybe let's scale this up. Let's see if the iterations do anything here. Not really. And let's say we're happy with this. So I'm going to use extrude inner and extrude these polygons forward a little bit. And I'm going to scale these down to 0. And delete them. Optimize the object. Let's switch on the subdivision surfaces, and you can see we're getting again a very nice and clean transition. However, you can also see that the shape that we're getting is not really a circle, but we can change that using the Nitro Cycle tool. So I'll go to point mode and select these points here, and then I can use the Nitro Cycle tool, left click on one of those points, and you can see we're getting a perfectly circular shape now. And we could also try and do that with these points here. Let's see if I can reselect these, scale them down. And use that again. Let's go ahead and subdivide this. And we're getting a perfectly circular shape, at least here at the front. If I close that polygon hole and select these polygons, let's do, actually first of all I want to scale these down again. Let's use extrude inner, and I'll extrude this back a bit, subdivide this, and you can see now we have a perfectly circular shape, at least here at the front. So let's have a look at one more example, and for this one I'm going to use this cylinder here. Again, I'll just drag out a copy, and I'll change the segments again. So I do want to make sure that, you know, for the rotation segments, I do have an amount of segments that will support the shape that I'm creating, but we can change the height segments. And let's go for something that is elongated again. Maybe let's do something like this. And let's just see how that works. So I'll stick with 24, well, let's do 20 segments. Let's change that as well. And I'll just bring these segments down to maybe something like this. Let's see how that works. So I'll make this editable, go to polygon mode, and I'm going to select a couple of polygons here. Let's go for a selection like this, then use the Nitro Cycle tool, and you can see we're getting a bit of a mess here. So I'm going to rotate that shape a little bit, something like this, and we should probably make this a little bit smaller too, maybe something like this. And of course you can play around with the roundness depending on what you want. I do want a shape that looks like this. So let's go ahead and use extrude inner, and I'm going to extrude this up a bit, and again scale these polygons down to 0. Let's do another extrusion, and I'm going to use extrude inner. Let's put this in a subdivision surface object, and you can see again we're getting something that is looking really clean as far as I can see, and that would be much harder to do if you tried modeling this without this plugin. So that was the Nitro Cycle tool. Next we're going to have a look at the Nitro Cycle generator. In this last section of this tutorial we're going to have a look at the second tool from the Nitro Cycle plugin, which is the Nitro Cycle generator. And like with the Nitro Cycle tool, you will need editable geometry in order to make this work. But before we make anything editable, let's just go ahead and add the generator to the scene. And in order for this to work, the object that you want to put some holes in needs to be a child of that generator. Let's use this plane as an example. I'll make it editable and add it as a child to that generator. And now we can make selections. So I'll do a polygon selection, and you can see that immediately the generator will create the shape once you've made that selection. And you can have multiple selection, and like with the Nitro Cycle tool, you can make more than one selection. So I'll make a couple here. Let's click on the Nitro Cycle generator, and you can see all of the options down here. Right at the top we have an editor mode. We're going to skip that for now and get back to it a little bit later. And we also have a mode. This mode option allows you to switch from polygons to points to edges. So right now we have a polygon selection. If I go to edge mode and select some edges here, I don't see any change, and the reason is because I need to switch that mode from polygon to edge. And now the generator will create the shape from the selected edges and remove the other shapes that we created in polygon mode. And if I go back to polygon mode, we still have our selections and the shapes that are created, and the same of course goes for point mode. If I select a point here, switch to point mode, the shape for the selected point in this case will be created. Let's go back to polygon mode. Unlike the Nitro Cycle tool, the Nitro Cycle generator is parametric. So we can still make changes to these shapes if we want to. So let's go ahead and have a look at how we can do that. But first of all, I think I'll just continue from top to bottom. You can also have selections and restrict the effect of the generator to a specific selection. Maybe let's do that first. So if I go to polygon mode, and I'll just set a selection for this, and then I'll deselect everything and I'll make another selection, and I'm going to set that. The tool will use the current selection. However, you can change that by dragging this other selection into this slot here, and now we can work with this selection. We could also just double click on the selection tag to reselect the other selection, and now we can only work with this selection here. And if I delete both of these, we still have the polygon selection for this area here, so that's the one that the generator will be using, and we can add more selections again if we want to. The profile mode is for using splines to create a profile around the openings that you can create. We're going to have a look at that later. And there's a couple of options here, in, out, or both. We have a profile offset, and we can drag a spline into this slot here. And I've already prepared one that we can use later, but for now we're going to skip that section. The surface option allows us to define whether or not the selection will be adjusted to the surface. In this particular case we have a flat surface, so switching this from the default off to original or target, which is similar to what we could do with the Nitro Cycle tool, will have no effect whatsoever in this case. If you're working with curved surfaces, target will probably be the option you want to use. And like with the cycle tool, we have options for scale. And you can see all of the selections will be scaled together. There is an option to make adjustments to individual selections using the editor mode. We're going to wait a little bit before we use that. And we also have the option to make the shapes rounder, like we did with the Nitro Cycle tool, and we have an option for the iterations. And that again is the same that we had with the Nitro Cycle tool. And we have an option to rotate the shapes. The generator is more powerful than the cycle tool because, one thing, it is parametric, and we also have the option to automatically delete the polygons. So if I check this box here, the polygons get deleted and the holes will be created. Below the delete polygons option, we have a couple of options for thickness or related to the thickness. Right now this is grayed out because we don't have any thickness for these holes yet, and we can change that by entering a number down here. And the option is still grayed out. That is because if you want to use that, you will have to uncheck the delete polygons option, which means that in this case we're getting closed geometry. So we can define the thickness, we can go up or down. If I go negative, it's not going to have the desired effect here. In order for the negative numbers to work, again, you will have to uncheck delete polygons, and now we're extruding these shapes upwards. Related to the thickness is the option to define the hard edges, which are the control edges that we need when we subdivide these shapes. We also have an option to fix the thickness. Now if I check this here, you won't see any changes. I'll try to show you this using a different object, and the object I will be using is this cylinder here. I will make this editable, and I'm going to create a polygon selection like this, then hold down Alt and add the Nitro generator, and I'm going to use thickness for this one. And let's extrude this out a little bit. Maybe the selection is not a good choice. I'll just go back and make this a little bit bigger, maybe. And as you can see, you can interactively draw shapes here. I'll just start with a new selection. Let's do maybe something like this. And hopefully I can show you the fix thickness option here. So let's see if we can make this a little rounder. I also want to switch the surface to target, so you can see the shape gets adjusted to the curvature here. And you can also see that our extrusion changes, and it's not really circular anymore. Now with the Nitro Cycle tool, you saw that we could select the points and use the Nitro Cycle tool to turn this shape into a circular shape. And we have a similar option for the generator, and it's called Fix Thickness. If I check this box, you can see we're getting a nice and round shape again. And I think we need to decrease the percentage for the hard edge here, because the geometry was kind of intersecting here. So that is what fix thickness means. Let's go back to our other object here. I'll just hide this one. And it looks like I screwed things up here, so I guess I'll just start over and select some polygons here. And the last thing I want to show you is the profile mode or profile options that we have and what they mean. In the tutorial videos that you get for download, this was not described, so I'll try and explain it to the best of my knowledge. I'm still trying to find out though how to really use that, but I was able to make it work, so I'm going to show you what you need to do in order to use that option. Now first of all, what I want to do is delete the polygons, and let's move this, or let's make these extrusions downwards. Let's just decrease the amount for the hard edges. So now we have something like this, and we want to add a profile, which is a shape around these holes, and for this you need a spline, and I've prepared a profile spline. And if I go back to model mode, one thing that seems to be important is the size of that spline, and also it is important that the object axis of the spline is somewhere near that spline, because it has an effect on where the profile is created. I'll just switch on snapping and the axis, and I'll just move that object axis, and I want to snap it to my spline, so I need to switch on spline snap. Okay, something like this. And like I said, this seems to be fairly important, and you can see I've made this spline fairly small because that also has an effect on how this is working. So let's go to the generator and use that profile. And in order for this to work, we need to drag our profile spline into this slot here. And you can see something changes, but it doesn't look right. I think what we need to do is change the profile mode to, let's try out, let's try in, play with the offset. Now the offset moves it away from that opening or more to the inside of this opening. And let's see, is there anything else we need to do? I was able to make it work the first time, so not sure what I need to do. Let's just play around with those settings a little bit. It is working. You can see down here we're getting this ledge here. So if I move this offset over to here, we can make this ledge a little bit bigger. I haven't found out yet how to change this without being limited to what I have here in the offset options. And profile mode out obviously means that this profile or additional shape is created at the bottom of the object. And if I set this to in, it should actually be created somewhere at the top here. but it seems like I can't get this to work. I'll just try to change a few of those settings and see if it makes any difference. Sometimes you also need to switch the generator off and on again for this to work. Let's try that. And look, we're getting something different. Out and in. So this is one thing that doesn't really seem to work as expected. Can I move this spline up maybe? I don't know if that makes any changes. I'm just randomly trying to make changes here to get this to work, but it seems I can't. I'll just undo a few steps. And let me just try that again. So this is the option for the bottom, which seems to work, but the other one doesn't. So I have no idea how to change that. I could play around with this forever and accidentally get it to work. Let me just try one more thing. Maybe this has something to do with the extrusion. Ah, there we go. You can see that if I change that a little bit, as long as I don't make the extrusion too deep, it actually seems to kind of work. Not a very good result in this particular case. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but basically that's what you can do with the profile option. You can add this shape around these holes here. So it's a bit tricky. I kind of got it to work, but not the way I really wanted it to. Let's try and put this in a subdivision surface. So you can see this is basically what you get with that spline, or with that profile if you use that. And when I played around with this, I also found a way to make the edges on the profile spline a little bit sharper. Let's see if we can do that. And the way I did that was I changed the spline type from linear to a schema or cubic. Let's see what happens if we switch that off and on again. And you can see now we're getting sharper edges for that spline here. We do have a lot of geometry though, so I probably also want to change the angle. Let's bring this up to 20. And it's not updating interactively again, so I'll switch the generator off and back on. You can see we have a lot less geometry on that spline now. Let's see if we can reduce this even a little bit further. Yeah, there we go. So with the exception of that profile option, which is a bit weird, this is a really great plugin for creating holes in the geometry of your objects. There is something that I forgot to mention, and that is the editor mode. let's go ahead and have a look at that. I'm just going to remove that profile, and maybe let's switch off the thickness as well. So with the generator selected, let's go down here in the to the attributes manager and switch on editor mode. And as soon as you do that, you can see that you're getting these white dots for each of the shapes that are created. And what you can do is you can left click on a point. You can see if I hover my cursor over it, it turns red, and then you can make certain changes. So if I left click and drag, I can change the scale, for example. And as soon as I let go of the mouse button, I'm also getting this tag, which is the Nitro Cycle tag. And you can see down here that the index that has been assigned to this shape here is 0. And we can now change the scale and only affect this area here and not the other areas, which is quite useful. And we can do all the things that we were able to do with the settings here when we created these shapes, and I probably can still do that, but you can see now the changes are only made to the shapes that don't have that selection tag. So if I go back here and select this tag, I can change the iterations for that opening or hole. I can change the rotation and the end scale, not sure what that does, and the thickness doesn't seem to do anything either. That's probably because I switched it off here. So as soon as I create some thickness, I can probably change that. Doesn't look like it. I'm not sure how I can get this to work. But everything else we can obviously change. So I'm going to deselect everything to also deselect the tag. Select the generator again. And we still have the editor mode switched on, so now let's go ahead and click on one of the other openings. Let's pick this one, and I'll make a slight adjustment to the scale, and as soon as I let go, I create another Nitro Cycle tag, and the index for this hole is 2, and now with this tag selected, I can make changes to this particular opening. It also seems to make changes to this hole here, which is interesting. Might be a bug. So I can rotate this, but as for the iterations, for some reason it changes both of these holes. And what's also interesting, you can see that I've tried to make some changes and somehow Cinema 4D or the plugin deselects everything. So that seems to be kind of a bug. And I think I can also switch the index to another number, but that doesn't do anything. So let's go back to 2. So the editor mode, it seems, is a bit buggy too. Let's try and make a change to this one, and I'm getting another tag, and this is index number 1. With the tag selected, we should be able to make changes here, change the scale, so that's all working, and it's only working on this opening as expected. Changing the thickness doesn't do anything, and I can right click on any of these parameters to reset them to the default. So that's interesting. Let's select this tag again. I can now rotate it and change it without affecting the third hole here, which is interesting. So anyway, that is what you can do or should be able to do when you're in the editor mode. And that's all I have for today. I hope you found this tutorial useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.